P-Style on the beat.
Bad man, bad man, bad man. Bad man, what?
Hey guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Queen Paco. For those of you viewing my channel for the first time, I hope my last episode was very useful. Today's topic is going to be a very completely different topic altogether because it's going to be about a sensitive topic that has been on the increase in our society. Today's topic is titled No Excuse for Domestic Violence. Domestic violence, be it physical or emotional, reaches every corner of our society. It does not respect class, race, religion, culture, or even wealth. It can be defined as an abuse of an individual within an intimate relationship, a family relationship, or an employer and employee relationship. An employer and employee relationship can mean maybe a master or a servant relationship, like a maid and a boss, something like that. It is a repeated, random, and habitual use of intimidation to control an individual. It affects men, women, children, and even maids. Overwhelmingly, domestic violence affects women and children, and the perpetrator is mostly male. We should also recognize that men, the elderly, and maids can also be abused. However, in this episode, I'll be paying close attention to domestic violence when it concerns women and children, not because the others are not important, but because this unacceptable act has been on the increase when it concerns women and children. Recent statistics show that domestic violence can affect 1 in 4 women, 1 in 6 men, and 1 in 5 children in their lifetime. And it leads to an average of 2 women being murdered every week, which is totally unacceptable. Also, recent studies show that 40 to 60% of these women were abused while pregnant. 36% of women with extensive abuse have attempted suicide. According to recent statistics, 51% of African women being beaten by their husband is justified, either when they go out without permission, or if they burn food, or like if they refuse to have sex with their husband, neglect their children, or argue back, which is completely bizarre because it's unreasonable and it's unfair. It's a backward mentality. It shouldn't be so because we should have freedom to do whatever we want to do. I'm not saying you should like neglect your children, don't get me wrong, but like no one should be subject to such violence. No one should be hurt because like we're not properties that we should be treated anyhow. Women should be respected and cherished. No grounds can ever be justified for domestic violence, no matter who you think you are. Women are not properties that you can treat however you like. Women are supposed to be loved and cherished, not used as punching bags. The day you raise your hand to hit a woman, that's the day you cease to become a man. I'm sorry, but that's a painful truth. If you want to test your strength as a man, why don't you go and hit your fellow man instead of hitting a woman? That's my opinion. I'm sorry if that hurts. A lot of people are suffering every day as a result of this evil act, and we as a people have to speak up and just stand for each other against this inhumane treatment. The gravity of this crime has to be known to all. We have to stop treating this issue as a domestic issue and start treating it as a crime that it is. It is battery and assault, and we cannot continue to hide under the shadow of love and continue to become victims of this atrocious act. The truth is, if violence has occurred more than once or twice, it's extremely likely to happen again. The violence usually gets worse over time, increasing in frequency and severity. Violence against women goes beyond beatings. It includes things like sexual harassment, marital rape, intimidation at work, forced marriage, forced abortion, forced pregnancy, and so on and so forth. Sometimes we're so focused on women that we forget that children suffer highly from domestic violence, maybe as victims or even as a result of the fact that they witnessed domestic violence, or maybe a child that was even a victim, maybe a child taken in as a maid that was subjected to this torturous act. It happens on a daily basis. A clear example is the story of a woman who had a maid. The maid was just 10 years old and she left this little girl at home with little food. So like the madam got back one day and she realized that the maid had eaten the food at home because like she had finished working and she had done everything. So the maid actually the madam actually beat her up because like she had eaten like all the food. After working, like, don't you get to eat? Okay, that's not even the issue. That's not even the big deal. She actually used hot iron on this little girl just because she ate the food at home. Can you imagine that? Even if someone is not your child, that doesn't give you the right to treat someone like a slave. Because sometime, you expect your children to be treated rightly. And who would want their child to be treated like that? That's totally unfair to treat a human being like that. So children suffer highly from this inhumane treatment, and we should stop it. It's not right, it's not fair. And if you see someone being treated this way, we should learn to speak up. I'm sure most of you will probably be like, oh, like it's not my business. What if it was your child going through something like that? Would you want your child to suffer something like that? No. Personally, like, I don't think I can stand to see someone suffer and go through something like that. That's not fair. So please, speak up. When it comes to the issue of violence on children, there's always an excuse of trying to instill discipline on the child. There's a quote I love very much by Junot, and it goes like this: when a child hits an adult, it's called hostility. When an adult hits an adult, we call it assault. But when an adult hits a child, we call it discipline. We have to stop hiding behind discipline to execute such adverse acts. Domestic violence does not just affect the victims, but indirectly those who witness it. For example, probably the family, the friends, and the loved ones of the victims. It can affect them in so many ways. Probably even cause like psychological illness to them. In this episode, I'll be looking at effects of domestic violence on women and children, and also factors that hold people back in such relationships. Lastly, I'll also be looking at solutions to this lingering issue. Effects of domestic violence. The chronic exposure to domestic violence does not only cause physical injury, but causes a mental shift when the mind attempts to process trauma or even protect the body. It includes post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, sleeping disorder, potential bullying, revengeful behavior, and so on and so forth. One of the effects of domestic violence on women and children is depression. But first of all, what then is depression? Depression is a mood disorder that causes a persistent feeling of sadness and loss of interest. It affects how one feels, thinks, and behaves, and it can lead to a lot of physical and emotional problems. One may have difficulties doing day-to-day activities and may even feel like life isn't worth living. Depression can change a person's outlook, which can lead to a feeling of hopelessness. This in turn can affect a person's ability to make decisions. Depression sometimes can even make people contemplate suicidal thoughts. Children can suffer from depression, especially when they have no one to talk to, or when they're trying to process what they're going through and they don't really understand what it is that is happening. Sometimes they blame themselves for what is going on. Probably they feel like their parents don't love them enough, or probably like they're not wanted, or they're the cause of what is happening. So they just feel so bad and they start hurting themselves, or they resort to things like drug addiction, they start smoking, or do so many other funny things. Another effect of domestic violence is post-traumatic stress disorder, which is also known as PTSD. PTSD is an anxiety disorder that is caused by frightening and distressful events. A lot of victims relive these events through flashbacks and nightmares. Sometimes they even feel a feeling of isolation, irritability, or even guilt. They may have problems sleeping, such as insomnia, and they may have problems even concentrating. Many people who go through this traumatic experience have problems adjusting and coping for a while. A lot of people deal with pain in different ways. Some people try to numb the pain, and when it comes back in future, they break down completely. PTSD sometimes affects people weeks after the frightening events happen, sometimes months or even years. Thirdly, another effect of domestic violence is potential bullying. This can be seen frequent in children who are victims of domestic violence or children who have witnessed domestic violence. Recent studies have shown that children who have witnessed domestic violence are more likely to commit violence when they become adults. Children who grow up in violent homes are more likely to be involved in abusive relationships, not because they actually want it to be so, but because that's what they know love to be. That's what they've been taught. And that's the only way they know how to express love. Maybe if they've been in a home where their dad is always hitting their mom on a daily basis, probably if their wife or the spouse or someone close to them, a loved one, should do something to hurt them, the slightest opportunity they get, they try to hurt them to defend themselves, because their dad, who was their role model, always used to hit their mom. and that's the best way they know how to defend themselves. Thus is a negative impact on children. Lastly, under the effect of domestic violence on women and children, revengeful behavior. Domestic violence can lead to revengeful behavior in the life of the victims. Due to the continuous assault and battery, the victim can decide to end this by attacking or inflicting harm on the perpetrator. There is a known psychological condition that female victims suffer from, known as battered woman syndrome. I'll be drawing an example from a book written by a victim of domestic violence of a woman who suffered from battered woman syndrome. The example goes like this. A woman had suffered domestic violence from her husband for a period of 10 years, including physical violence, food deprivation, marital rape. After a prolonged period of torture and endurance in the marriage, she finally decided to end everything by setting her husband ablaze because she had had enough. Another clear example is the story of a woman called Sarah Taunton who had suffered prolonged domestic violence from her husband. One day she decided to make him drunk, so she gave him like a lot of alcohol, and when he had drank a lot, she actually stabbed him to death. Taking a close look at these examples, it can be seen that these women had suffered from inhumane treatment, and as a result of this, they suffered from a psychological illness which made them act irrational. Secondly, I'll be talking about significant barriers to leaving an abuser, which can also be known as factors that hold people back in such relationships. Firstly, financial dependence on perpetrator. Most times in domestic violence inflicted marriages, women are so dependent on the husband that they sometimes feel like they can't make it on their own. So this makes them stay in that marriage because they feel like if they leave, they can't survive without the man because maybe they depend on him for income or something. Such thoughts are primitive and unacceptable because you can succeed without being tied to anyone. The real you is peculiar, strong, and you have the capacity to succeed in spite of your background or your history. Secondly, people stay in abusive relationships because of the fact that they have children and also because they hide under the shadow of love. Tell me something. If you're being beaten to death by that man or whoever, are you going to take care of your children in the grave? God forbid. My dear, you better be wise and forget about that love that you're talking about, because someone who loves you will not subject you to a punching bag. So you have to live for your children, because if you're there and he keeps beating you and use you as a punching bag, someday who knows what will happen to you? Someone might not be there and he might hurt you and you might actually breathe your last breath. But that is not your portion. You have to be strong. Is that you speak up or you actually make him realize that what he's doing is wrong. Because you can't just keep dying in silence. You can't keep dying in silence because the children you're claiming to protect, if you're not there, who's going to take care of them? You have to be alive to protect them, right? So look out for yourself, forget about love. Another barrier to leaving an abuser is social stigmatization. This is one of the reasons why people stay in abusive relationships. Most times they fear societal stigmatization because they don't want to be judged or seen as a victim, or they don't want the public to see them as someone who has abandoned their home or neglected their family. But you're the one wearing the shoes and you know where it hurts. So you shouldn't care what the society has to say, because society is not with you in that marriage. They're not there suffering the beating on a daily basis with you. So you shouldn't care what anyone has to say. I know it's not easy. It's one thing saying it and it's one thing doing it. But look out for yourself, not what the society has to say. It's time to speak up and act before it's too late. Lastly, I'll be talking about solutions to this crisis. The right way to treat this issue is to treat it as a crime that it is, not a domestic issue. The first thing you have to do is call for help. It's a necessity for victims as well as relatives or family members to call for help from the police or authorities. You don't have to wait for an emergency before you call for help. The signs are always there. Once it hits you once, twice, it will definitely happen again. You have to call for help before he hurts you again. Domestic violence is a crime and will forever be. If domestic violence is happening to you, it's important you talk to someone instead of dying in silence. If someone who suffers from domestic violence confides in you, it's important you listen and not judge, and you let them know that they're in a frightening situation and call the police if they want to. Sometimes calling the police or appropriate authority is enough in making the perpetrator think twice before committing such torturous act. Secondly, seek for medical help or professional help. A lot of people suffer from different things as a result of domestic violence. Things like post-traumatic stress, sleeping disorder, anxiety, depression, and sometimes it's advisable to speak to professional people, like people who can actually give you like professional help aside your relatives and friends. And many injuries require medical treatment. Victims who have been sexually abused should go to the hospital for medical evaluation. Sometimes it's also good to talk to like a therapist in order to express what you're really going through, to get like a professional advice, so like you don't feel judged, because most people feel reluctant talking to like their family, friends or loved ones, maybe because they feel shy, or they feel like they're going to judge them, or they may not really understand what they're going through. You can talk to a therapist. They can like provide you like a professional like opinion. Lastly, speak out publicly against domestic violence. For example, if you hear a joke about someone beating up their spouse, let them know you're not okay with that type of humor. The more people stand up and speak up against this act, the more perpetrators will know that there's a revolution against it. In order to stop this, we have to be vigilant about domestic violence and take steps of not condoning such acts. The only way to permanently stop domestic violence is for everyone to no longer try to control those they love or people around them. This goal will take educating young children to respect their partners, their loved ones, and people around them by encouraging them to maintain a healthy and respectful relationship to their loved ones and people around them. That's it for today, guys. This issue on domestic violence can no longer be condoned. I pray we all stand strong and speak against this evil by saying a big no to domestic violence, no matter the circumstance. Thank you all for watching, and see you all in my next episode. Don't forget to subscribe. Bye for now. Bye.
P-Style on the beat.
Bad man, bad man, bad man. Bad man want me to die. Bad man want me to fall. Bad man want talk too much. Bad man, bad man, bad man go away. Bad man want this place. Don't wanna destroy your face. Don't wanna judge my own case. Yeah. They say they wanna test me. Ghost mode, no blood, God bless me. Bad man in my clan tryna guess me. If they come around, I'ma some of them Wesley. These niggas messed up, so the feeling gets out. Just 2 seconds, I'ma make a baby shout. I just started up, son of the South.